Imagine an outbreak hits a community. You'd probably think the very first sign of like blaring sirens, right? Or a packed hospital waiting room, or some dramatic public health warning on the evening news.
Yeah, that's the Hollywood version of it.
Exactly. But if you ask any actual epidemiologist, they will tell you this really terrifying truth. By the time you see the panic, you have already lost.
Right, because the outbreak didn't actually start with those sirens at all.
No, it didn't?
It started months ago in absolute silence, completely unnoticed by the people who are supposedly in charge.
And today, we're taking that exact scientific reality, the hard mechanics of how a biological disease spreads, and applying it to something you deal with every single day. Human behavior.
Yeah, which is completely wild when you really think about it.
It is. I mean, look at your office, look at your neighborhood, or your family group chats, or, I don't know, your social circles. Toxicity, apathy, harm, they don't just happen randomly. They literally infect a group.
They absolutely do. And we're looking at a fascinating source document today titled, "What a DSL Can Learn From an Epidemiologist."
Such a great title.
Right. And just for those outside the education world, a DSL is a designated safeguarding lead. So that's the person inside a school who's tasked with, keeping kids safe, monitoring well-being, managing crises, that sort of thing.
And what this document does, what's so brilliant about it, is it forces a total perspective shift. It basically asks us to stop looking at toxic behavior like bullying, misogyny, or even corporate burnout. It's just a series of individual bad choices.
Yeah, and start looking at it as an actual contagion.
Okay, let's unpack this, because it's a brilliant framework. Human beings are deeply social creatures, so the way an attitude spreads.
It's structurally identical. The way an attitude spreads through, say, a Year 9 math class is mechanically the exact same way a cynical culture spreads through a corporate sales team.
Which makes sense, but if we're looking at human behavior like a virus, my mind immediately goes straight to the movies. Like, we are always looking for patient zero.
Oh, totally. The one person who sneezed on the bus.
Right. The one guy coughing in the airport.
Yeah.
But our source document completely attacks that idea. It says that's wrong.
It does. In real-world epidemiology, and especially in social dynamics, the quote-unquote first case is virtually a myth.
A myth? Wait, how is it a myth? You can't have an outbreak without a first case. Someone has to start the rumor, or someone has to bring the veit into the school.
Well, biologically, yeah, of course there is an initial point of introduction. But practically speaking, from a management perspective, the index case is a myth because it is almost never identified until the outbreak is already mature.
Oh, I see.
The idea that you can isolate the exact origin point of a widespread problem, it's really just an illusion that leaders tell themselves so they can feel in control. By the time a leader or a principal or a CEO sees a, quote, major incident.
Like the undeniable public event that forces everyone into a formal meeting.
Exactly. By the time that happens, the harmful culture has been circulating quietly through the community for weeks or even months.
So it's not that the first case literally doesn't exist. It's just that early on, it doesn't look like a threat yet.
Precisely. Let's look at the mechanisms of how this actually spreads in a peer group. Issues like coordinated exclusion or digital self-harm or casual racism, they do not just magically appear in 20 students at once.
Right. They travel through what the document calls social permission.
Yes.
So explain how that social permission actually works. What does that transmission look like on the ground, like day to day?
Think about a group chat. One person tests the waters with maybe a slightly cruel comment about another student. The virus is essentially looking for a host.
Okay.
Now, if the group immediately shuts it down, the virus dies, the social immune system worked.
But if nobody says anything?
Or worse, if someone responds with a laughing emoji.
Oh, man.
Right. The social cost of cruelty just dropped. The behavior has been granted permission.
And the adults, the leaders, they completely miss this early stage because they just write it off. They say things like, oh, boys will be boys, or...
They're just figuring out their social dynamics. Exactly. They dismiss the early symptoms as normal baseline behavior. The harmful behavior normalizes socially long before it ever becomes visible institutionally.
You know, it really makes me think of a leaky pipe inside a wall.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. Because you don't know the pipe is leaking the moment it drips. You only know it's leaking when you finally see this massive, ugly brown wet spot spreading across your living room drywall.
Yeah, when the damage is obvious.
But the visible spot isn't the start of the problem. By the time you see the wall actually rotting, The water has been traveling along the internal wood framing, it's soaking the insulation, and it's just quietly spreading in the dark for months.
That is a perfect mechanical comparison, because harm spreads through networks, not in isolation. Safeguarding concerns, they are networked.
So if the first case looks like an isolated minor incident, how do we train our brains to spot the leak before the wall collapses?
Well, you have to realize that they follow the pathways of friendship groups, online communities, boarding house dynamics, the water traveling along the internal wood in your analogy. That is the peer influence system.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second here.
Go for it.
If I am a principal or a CEO and I look at my organization and, everything is quiet, productivity is high, the grades are good, the hallways are perfectly orderly, and absolutely nobody is actively complaining to HR or the guidance counselor.
You'd assume everything is fine.
Right. Why wouldn't I assume everything is fine? Why on earth would I assume there is a hidden virus?
What's fascinating here is that silence is often just a symptom of a highly effective transmission environment.
Wow. That is deeply unsettling.
It really is. It completely challenges the core metric most leaders use to gauge success. We naturally equate peace and quiet with safety.
Of course we do. It's human nature.
But the source warns us that public calm can absolutely hide underlying spread. Visible order is not evidence of emotional safety.
So what is actually happening in that quiet environment then? I mean, if people are hurting or if a really toxic culture is spreading, why aren't they speaking up?
This is where we have to look at the petri dish. In epidemiology, environment shapes transmission.
Right.
Some environments actively accelerate the spread of a virus because the conditions are just perfectly tuned to support it. In a school or a workplace, an unsafe culture thrives where belonging is incredibly fragile.
Meaning you're terrified of losing your spot in the group.
Exactly. If the culture socially punishes the person who speaks up, people learn very quickly to hide the symptoms.
So they aren't safe. They are just socially conditioned to be quiet.
Yes. They are quiet because the environment has been structurally designed, often completely accidentally, by the way, to protect the virus rather than the victim.
That is wild. And the document specifically calls out banter as one of these environmental factors, right?
It does.
How does banter actually function as a transmission pathway? Because usually we just think of banter as harmless, joking around.
Banter is actually one of the most effective cloaking devices for toxic behavior. Because when cruelty is disguised as a joke, it puts the victim in an impossible position.
Because they can't get mad without looking like the bad guy.
Exactly. If they object, they are accused of lacking a sense of humor, which immediately threatens their social belonging.
So the victim is forced to absorb the harm just to stay in the group.
Yes. And from a systemic level, when authority figures hear that banter and they don't intervene, they are effectively turning up the heat on the petri dish.
They're signaling that the environment tolerates low-level harm.
Precisely. Once that happens, the virus multiplies rapidly because it faces zero institutional resistance.
So the traditional way we handle this in schools and in businesses is basically like playing whack-a-mole, right? Stomping on individual embers.
Very much so.
A kid says something cruel, they get detention. An employee makes a toxic comment, they get a warning from HR. We treat the individual incident and assume we've solved the problem.
But while you are stomping out those individual embers, the root system of the forest is burning underground. That is the fundamental flaw of treating social harm as an isolated event.
Which brings us to how we actually fight this. Because if we can't trust the surface-level calm and stomping on embers doesn't work, we have to adopt the epidemiologist's absolute obsession, which is data.
Yes. Data is everything. An epidemiologist does not look at an isolated cough and just treat the patient.
Right.
They look at frequency, they look at clusters, geographical trends, and escalation patterns. Because isolated incidents rarely reveal the full mechanical picture of the disease.
The source notes, and I love this quote, it says, "Repetition reveals culture more clearly than isolated incidents."
It's so true. For a safeguarding lead, intelligence comes from pattern analysis. You have to look for behavioral clusters.
Like what kind of clusters?
Well, are you seeing an increase in misogynistic language specifically in the Year 9 boys? Or, in a corporate setting, are repeat low-level concerns happening in one specific department at your company?
Or maybe similar disclosures emerging across entirely different peer groups at the exact same time.
Exactly. You are looking for the pattern, not the individual event.
Hang on, though. If I start tracking quote-unquote clusters of behavior and analyzing who is talking to whom, aren't I just micromanaging?
It can feel that way to some people, sure.
Like, doesn't that create this creepy surveillance state where I am treating my team or these students like lab rats in an experiment.
It is a really common fear, but it fundamentally misunderstands the goal of the data. Punitive tracking builds dossiers on people. Epidemiological tracking builds a dossier on the culture.
Oh, that's a great distinction. Expand on that difference a little bit.
Okay, so if you are micromanaging, you are tracking data to find out who to punish. You are looking for the bad apple.
Right.
But the epidemiological framework recognizes that if multiple people are exhibiting the same harmful behavior, the problem isn't just the individuals, it is the environment. The data tells you where the social immune system of your organization has collapsed.
Ah, I get it. So if I see 3 different conflicts erupting in the same department in 1 week, the traditional manager fires the 3 employees.
Right.
But the epidemiological manager looks at the department head, the workflow, and the communication structures to figure out why that specific room is suddenly breeding conflict.
Precisely. You are looking for the vulnerability in the system, not just the flaw in the person. And the reason you track those patterns early is to dramatically reduce the cost of intervention.
Because the financial and emotional cost of a late-stage crisis is just staggering.
It's massive. Early containment limits harm and protects the wider system. Think about the application in a school, an immediate low-level pastoral conversation, or a quick check-in with a peer group takes maybe 20 minutes. It's a minor intervention.
But if you ignore that data,
If you wait for the undeniable public incident, you are no longer doing preventative safeguarding. You are managing a community-wide destabilization.
you're dealing with entrenched bullying, traumatized students, furious parents.
And an institutional panic that honestly takes years to undo.
There is a line in the document that perfectly captures this. It says, "The safeguarding conversation, avoided early, often becomes the crisis meeting later."
Yeah, the systems that ignore the subtle early warning signs eventually pay a massive price because the virus doesn't just go away. It adapts, it entrenches itself, and it literally waits for a moment of stress to explode.
I have to stop you there, though, because as brilliant as this data tracking framework sounds, it feels, I don't know, incredibly clinical.
I know what you mean.
We aren't actually talking about influenza here. We are talking about human beings,
Yes.
often very young human beings.
Yes, absolutely.
Treating a 14-year-old kid
Yeah.
who makes a mistake like they are a viral host that needs to be neutralized,
Yeah.
that feels deeply dehumanizing.
And it would be if we took the metaphor completely literally. The source material is very careful to draw a hard line here, and it is a crucial distinction. We are borrowing the math of epidemiology, not the ethics.
Right, because students are not, quote, carriers of harm. They aren't vectors to be eradicated.
Human behavior is infinitely more emotionally complex than a biological disease transmission model. A virus has no feelings, no trauma history, and no context.
Exactly.
When an epidemiologist tracks a highly contagious pathogen, the goal is often strict quarantine and elimination. But when a leader is tracking safeguarding risks, the intervention must remain fiercely human-centered.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, then let me ask this. So what does this all mean for the actual intervention? Like, how does a DSL actually intervene when they find the index case? Say you track the data and you find the specific student who introduced a really cruel form of online exclusion to their friend group. How do you act on that without treating them like a villain in a pandemic movie?
You shift from public health mechanics back to pastoral care. You have to realize that the student spreading the harm is frequently a highly vulnerable young person themselves.
It's not a villain story.
Not at all. The intervention isn't about isolating them. It is about asking why the behavior occurred. Why are they seeking status through cruelty? What is fragile in their own sense of belonging that makes them feel the need to tear down someone else?
So the science helps us track the invisible network, but the response has to remain deeply empathetic. We use the data to find the problem, but we use humanity to solve it.
Yes. The goal is to build up the social and relational capacity of the group. You intervene early, not to punish the, quote, first case into oblivion, but to interrupt the spread before the unsafe culture normalizes.
You offer relational repair.
To everyone involved in the network, including the person who started it, you are trying to strengthen the community's immune system by teaching them how to handle conflict healthily.
That is the crucial pivot. It's using the rigorous pattern recognition of a scientist paired with the deep empathy of a counselor.
Because if you only have the empathy, you will constantly be overwhelmed. You'll just be reacting to the visible crises as they pop up.
You'll just be putting out fires all day.
Right. But if you only have the science, you will build a cold, punitive surveillance system that alienates absolutely everyone. You need both.
This has been an incredibly eye-opening journey through the mechanics of human behavior. We started by dismantling the myth of the first case, realizing that harm begins quietly, through unchallenged social permission, long before it ever becomes visible.
We explored the Petri dish effect, understanding how environments like banter lower the social cost of cruelty, and why a quiet, orderly room might just be masking massive emotional distress.
And we also looked at the necessity of stepping back from individual embers to see the systemic fire. Tracking behavioral clusters allows leaders to intervene early, saving immeasurable emotional and institutional costs.
But we grounded all of that in the reality that we are dealing with human beings.
Yeah.
Data finds the network, empathy repairs the harm.
Which brings us to the system-level question that the document poses, and it's the question you really need to ask yourself about your own setting.
This raises an important question. Whether you manage a corporate division, lead a school, or just navigate a complex family dynamic, if toxic culture were spreading quietly through your network right now, would your systems detect it early enough to contain it?
What emotional norms or relational risks or low-level toxic behaviors might currently be spreading undetected because you are equating silence with safety? Are you intervening early enough, or are you just staring at the wall, waiting for the wet spot of a full-blown crisis to finally appear?
It requires a total reevaluation of how we define a safe environment.
It really does. But I want to leave you with a final thought that spins this entire concept on its head, something to really chew on after this deep dive.
Oh, I like where this is going.
If toxic behaviors, apathy, cruelty, and harm spread through a social network following the exact same biological rules as a contagious virus, could positive behaviors be engineered to do the exact same thing?
Applying the mechanics of contagion to build immunity.
Exactly. If we know how the network operates, can we use the epidemiologist playbook not just to stop a bad outbreak, but to intentionally spark a good one? Could empathy, psychological safety, or the courage to stand up for a peer become equally contagious?
I mean, if you set up the environment correctly and you lower the social cost of vulnerability rather than cruelty,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely.
You track the positive clusters, you engineer a culture where belonging goes viral. Because if the pathways of transmission are already built into our social networks, we might as well choose what flows through them. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep looking beyond the surface, and we'll see you next time.